Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is the CTO and the founding engineer at Reddit. He helped build Reddit, sold it, and has recently come back with the other co-founders to rebuild the platform. He is currently leading the engineering division and the architectures. Per to Reddit, he holds a PhD in physics from Harvard University. His name is Chris Slowe. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
You started programming when you were younger because you like computer games. You studied physics at grad school. You joined YC. Reddit founders were renting an apartment with you. To start off the show, can you share with us your side of the story on how you started and how you got to where you are today?
Cool. So let me give the abridged version of my life story. I started using computers. So let me get quick vintage on me. So I'm a 90s kid. I'm late Gen X, which makes me a little old for most of the tech startups around these days, or at least the ones that haven't already IPO'd or done something else along the way. I got my start. My first computer I didn't get until I was about 14. And so I was in high school at that point. And I remember almost immediately, this is before, computers were by default networked. So it was like just sitting happily with my 486, like playing around with it. And I think that I discovered QBasic just by like trying every possible command on the DOS prompt to see what I got. And then found this entire programming environment and just like started playing with it. And so that was my first experience was like just kind of the figure it out method of computer programming. In the meantime, at the time, like there was a lot of work that went into curating your computer so you could actually run computer games. Memory management was a critical thing. And so just kind of learning all that stuff early on was definitely formative. In retrospect, at the time, it just seemed like normal tinkering that you do as a kid. And then later when I actually got into college, I remember I had to decide between, I was trying to decide between doing math, physics, and computer science. And so I ended up taking the intro at all three classes my freshman year. At that point in my career, I was definitely much more of an overachiever. That took years and years to burn out and decided to stick with physics actually at that point. And so did a whole degree in physics, made it all the way through to my PhD, and decided it was about 4 years into my PhD program where I started getting a little burnt out. And I think at that point, I didn't really know that was a thing. Because, I also didn't realize until that point that up until that point in your life, there's always like a 4-year limit on how long you do a thing. It's like, high school is 4 years, college is 4 years, PhD is whenever you finish your PhD. And so 4 years in, I was like, oh, so I have like 2 to 4 more years of this. Great. So I think I got a little bit jumpy, and actually got a friend pitch me on a startup that turned into me getting into the first Y Combinator batch, like totally lucky. And eventually turned me into being the first employee at Reddit when my startup failed. But my two roommates, whose names were Steve and Alexis, succeeded at keeping their company going for a lot longer. That's the short version.
Yeah. What is the long version? What is something like?
Well, I think the longer version is that finishing up. So for the Y Combinator, like first Y Combinator batch, it was fantastic. I don't think the nice thing about that batch is like we were all kind of doing it live. Like no one, the YC founders, especially Paul and Jessica, put a lot of work into Paul Graham and Jessica Livingston. Put a lot of work into trying to make it so that it was really easy and seamless to build a startup and like take all the BS out of it. So that because at that point, since 2005, we were still dealing with the hangover from the .com bust in 2000, and so people weren't really finding companies, and there wasn't really like an easy mechanism to even start a company. And so the fact that they managed to make it into a thing where you could just kind of like, here's some paperwork, here's an initial starting grant of like, I think at the time was $6,000 per co-founder, and just go. And that was unheard of, and it was really fantastic. And it was it was fantastic to be able to crash and burn that summer and have no company at the end of it. You learn from your failures, and that was definitely one of them. And I think subsequently to that, Reddit as a startup was just a real trip in that the thing about Reddit is that the site's just always grown. Like we've just always had this kind of low key growth. At the time in the early years, it was like much more low key. It was like we were doubling every 3 months in the first year. And so that meant that you could actually see on the traffic graph the noticeable kind of uptick of traffic. And so it was always this game of fighting against the scaling problems we'd have to deal with about, a month or two from now. Because, a month or two from now, we're going to be at like close to double traffic, which means whatever thing is creaking on the back end has to be fixed like immediately. So to go back into like the personal narrative part, from over the course of 2006, it went from working on Reddit was my nighttime activity, and by day I was a PhD grad student at Harvard. And then end of the year came around, and Reddit got acquired by Condé Nast. We were all told to move to California, and my PhD, I got my data from my PhD all in that last couple of months of the year. And so it turned into my PhD was my night job of me writing my thesis, and by day I was a software engineer working on Reddit. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such an awesome story. Speaking of your experience at YC, looking at other companies that joined YC at the same time, you all seems like geniuses now. Everyone's a superstar founder. How did Paul Graham filter out these young entrepreneurs? Now you guys are the quote unquote YC mafia. Everyone's super successful. Was it really obvious back then? What characteristics do you guys all have, or was it a coincidence?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's, I think from that initial YC batch, I don't remember the numbers of successes of that. There was definitely at least an early acquisition within that, like within maybe the first few months. One of the startups actually ended up merging up with Reddit. There was a blog startup by the name of Infogami that ended up merging up with Reddit right around the time I started in October. And so that counts as a success, I guess. But I think of those startups, about half of them probably failed in some way or another, or kind of like stuck around for a bit and like moved on. That said, there was a really awesome initial batch of people. So in that first summer batch, there was Emmett Shear and Justin Kahn, who later went on to found Justin TV, now Twitch. There was also Sam Altman, who was doing a startup that year. He's now the supreme all-knowing dictator of YC. And Sam's great. Sam's also on our board. And there's just a lot of, especially those early years, a lot of people who just kind of stuck with it. So I don't know. I think that there's definitely a chicken and egg problem of, hey, there was a gap that Paul identified that was out there. And so you tend to at the same time draw people who have a certain amount of like entrepreneurial spirit in them, and who are also willing to take our crazy risk. And also, I mean, that group was I think I was the outlier in that I was actually in grad school. Everyone else was basically fresh out of college. And so it was very much like a high beta, like it's going to work or it's not. And like, if it doesn't work, then like, yeah, we'll just get a job somewhere else. And I think that, that I don't want to, of course I want to downplay, how fantastic that group was. And like how that was actually most of the value on CNYC was just like being able to go to dinner once a week and hang out with people who were going through exactly the same thing you were at exactly the same time and exactly the same age group. And that's continued to be the main magic in YC, is the social network attached to it of like just shared commiseration, and also a pool of people who are entrepreneurs who are trying things out and might fail, but you can tap them for expertise. And if that doesn't work out, you can always hire them later. And like that sort of network is really valuable, honestly.
Yeah, totally. I feel like that sort of like resonate with the current cohort learning things. Everyone's trying to actually meet people instead of just like learning a particular knowledge. At that point, were your parents cool with you doing a PhD, and after you finish your PhD, like joining a startup that may most likely will fail, right? Like, yeah, how did that play out?
Oh, my parents were very not okay with it. They thought they weren't sure what I was doing, because at that point I had put all of my effort into finishing my, like, basically grad school and PhD was like the route. And I was my mom was, I hope she's probably going to listen to this later. Hi, Mom. My mom was very originally into me being a doctor, like the other kind of doctor, the MD.
Mm-hmm.
That's still a running joke. It's like whenever I joke about, like, I only bring up being a doctor now, either because I have to flex over something, which I hate doing, or as a joke. And every time I bring it up around my wife, she's like, he's not that kind of doctor. And so at least for I put so much time into academia that when she heard I was like spending time doing a startup, she was like, what is this thing you're doing in your spare time? Like, why aren't you working like harder on your PhD or other things? And especially when I decided to like stick with Reddit after grad school, definitely very skeptical given the path at that point. Now that said, one easy thing was like making software engineer money fresh out of grad school as opposed to making postdoc money was definitely not a bad thing. But that was like still felt like I was abandoning an entire career, which took a while to kind of convince. I think it actually legitimately took until probably like maybe the last year, maybe like roughly, before she's like, okay, maybe that's a good idea.
Before the CTO part, everything
my
else
mom has very high standards. So, it's like the overachiever thing wasn't in a vacuum.
Yeah, I feel you, because like, I don't know how obvious it was. Why did you pick the Reddit route versus a stable PhD route? Because it seems like the opposite, right? PhD seems like really, really stable after the program. Did you just really enjoy the problem solving thing, or like was it the people that you enjoy working with?
I think at the roots of it, I mean, the people were great. At the roots of it, it was very much the problems were interesting. I think that, the way that grad school ended up working out. So I was doing experimental physics, which meant I was spending roughly like a third of my time building computer simulations of whatever I was trying to build. And then a third of my time designing the next experiment. And a third of my time, like in a machine shop, building whatever I was going to do next. And then the remaining little sliver of time was actually like doing the science part of the of the degree. And so I had a lot of time to actually just like kind of ad hoc become a software engineer, like doing this. It's like effectively a couple of years of time in my grad school experience was me just doing software engineering. I didn't think of it in that way, but I was definitely doing it. And so I was able to kind of like practice those muscles, and it had always been like a background kind of fun activity. I think with just with Y Combinator especially, what it brought to the front was like there were all these interesting real world problems that people can bring to bear, where to some extent the solution is just like some combination of determination, brute force, and hope. And that was like the same problem that you had in grad school, but like in a much more, I don't know, it felt more tractable. I think grad school, by about 4 or 5 years in, it felt like there's this giant. There was a comic I remember around this time that really resonated with me. It was like somebody drew a picture of like, imagine this circle is all of human knowledge. Your PhD is you're going to take a little tiny dimple on the side, burst out into like the undiscovered territory, right? On this huge pile of knowledge. It's like little blip. And so it's that discoveries are few and far between. Well, discoveries are happening all the time, but academia is huge. And so like your contribution is going to be relatively kind of tiny over in the grand scheme of things. Whereas I felt like with software engineering, there were like real world problems and really hard problems that were being solved like live there, like now. And I think also the skill set of being a physicist is like around, it's like kind of you take problems apart. They train you for years just to learn how to take problems apart. And that works just as well in software engineering as it does in any kind of science. In fact, physicists are generally pains in the ass because there's this presumption that you can like solve any problem once you figure out physics. And it's true in the non-annoying way. It's true insofar as like you're trained for all of your time to like take a really hard problem and break it into pieces and then solve the pieces and then put it all back together. And that's a really great toolkit to be able to apply.
Wow, that's deep. I really like that you really set the core things that you learn at your PhD. It is like you said, it's like all internally related to programming as well. Taking a problem, breaking into smaller problems, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, because the big problem is usually difficult. The little problems are not necessarily easy, but they're usually easier than the big problem. And you can actually start applying tools to little problems. Like there's probably other people who have solved those problems.
Yeah.
Getting very abstract, but like that's kind of the nut of it.
Yeah, totally. I thought that's really cool. You are one of the really rare people who can handle all the really academic things as well as the startup world. Most likely when you hear about startup founders or like the startup teams are made up by the pirates of the world. They drop out of college and like not finish anything. And then you're like the good student. I assume you were like the straight A students all your career. Now,
guilty as charged.
Yeah, I mean, well, like, yeah.
Well, it's funny actually. I have a running. So there's a couple of other there's definitely a couple other PhDs at Reddit who I'm friends with, and a couple PhD dropouts and various levels of people, right? And so one of the running jokes I've had for a while is that it's like when you take somebody fresh out of school and you have to figure out what level they should be at as a software engineer. You have like your like there's this individual contributor ladder, IC1 through, in our case, 6. And so it's like fresh out of college is like IC1. Fresh out of master's is like an IC2. Mm-hmm. Fresh out of a PhD, IC1. Fresh out of like PhD dropout, IC3. And the reason behind that is that we spend so much time in academia, you start not being able to talk to normal people anymore, and so you have to have that kind of beaten out of you again once you've finished your degree. Whereas like the joke I have with some of the people who I know of who are fantastic software engineers who dropped out, it's like, well, first they knew what they wanted, which is just a great life skill to have. And whereas like I stuck it out for 7 years before I discovered what I wanted to have, or like, accepted the fact that there was another path.
Yeah. When you already invested so much time and energy into something, I definitely feel like I would be really committed as well. It's so cool. You got yourself into where you are now. Congratulations. And I'm curious, do you think like actually doing a PhD helps your career down the line? Or do you think it was just help you with the patience, training you to break down problems?
I think it depends very much on what area you're getting a PhD in. So I think I don't mean to pan academia as a critical, as a path. I think that the problem is that there are more PhDs than there are academic posts at any given time. And so, if you're going to get a PhD in something, at least make sure it's in something you can apply elsewhere or like get a job in industry, because it's a good hedge at the very least. I also think that, for computer science, probably less so critical for getting a PhD right now. Like masters are usually pretty good. A lot of the cutting edge stuff is happening in industry in many cases. And so, not to suggest that there hasn't been cutting edge things coming out of academic research, but usually the proof of it comes in academia, like out of academia, just because, real world problems, it's moving rapidly. It's kind of hard to be tapped into what's going on in the real world when you're in academia. Now that said, if you're talking about something like, biomedicine or pick your other route, like that's definitely much more of a case to go and finish a PhD. Also, keeping in mind that I've like tech is a distinct group for startups. I think biotech is its own beast, and definitely lots of PhDs running around over there, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I'll add is the places where I think more time in academia makes more of a difference. Data science is a place where that field didn't exist when I started. In fact, I remember the first time I heard the use of data science was around probably 2011, 2010. And I just remember thinking at the time, I was like, oh, so that's so all that stuff that we've been doing for the last couple of years has a name now. Great. I guess I'm a data scientist. That's great to know. So, because, at that point, it was like, there wasn't really much of a discipline. And so it was great to see it form. That's a place where like, having a degree in statistics, probably helpful. Knowing some more advanced techniques for things is definitely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool. I agree. Technology changes really fast. Most of the cutting edge technology is probably coming from the industry. When you started working at Reddit as their first employee, assuming back in time you were doing a lot of coding, now as a CTO, I assume you were spending a lot of time interacting with people. Throughout this journey, what is one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at?
I would say at this point, I only threaten to write code as a way to goad people into writing code. In fact, if anything, my main job, so a lot of the work we're doing right now at Reddit is to do a lot of like rebuild and rejuvenate and replace some of our older technology with new stuff, which is another way of saying, because not for any other reason than the newer stuff will scale. We can replace it with better technology, just apply new things. Which means that ultimately my current job is to replace all the stuff that I wrote like 10 or 15 years ago, which is actually kind of great. It's like I'm now erasing myself from the Git blame across the entire repository over time. The skills that I've been mostly putting time into has definitely been more on the people management side, or like the long-term strategic planning, less on the actual like day-to-day building and operations. I think I have I try to keep my skills sharp from the standpoint of like keep up with the current trends on what's going on with technology. I also have now 15 years of experience of like spidey sense on what's going to break, and being able to like inform our architectural discussions around like what to build and what not to build and why. But I also have some fantastic experts who are way better at that than I am. And so I think most of my job is now in the, honestly, hiring is a big part of my job at this point. Getting in some awesome people who are way better at their job than I would ever be. And then helping to provide direction where we're going, which is a lot harder than it sounds. Like I think there's nothing scary to me than a blank piece of paper of like, where are we going?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions saved up on the hiring side, or like on the how you pick the direction you are going to go, or the whole company is going to go. I'm going to save it for a little bit later. So one last question on like the personal development side. You work at Reddit because the Reddit founders came to you to rent your apartment while you were doing the PhD. Rumor says they were playing World of Warcraft until 3 p.m. and then you guys code, and then like everybody go to sleep, you go to work, the cycle repeats. That I don't know if it's true.
It's fairly true. In fact, my first job at Reddit before I was an employee was I was on a early morning schedule, like get up at 7 a.m, which was generally a couple hours after Steve would go to bed. Steve was at the time the only engineer working on Reddit, and it was, so that meant I was also a Reddit user at that point, and it was a pretty small niche site. And so I would be one of the first people in the morning to check it. And so I was like the second or third morning in a row where I had to like wake up Steve and was like, hey, Reddit's down, like bang on his door. He just showed me how to restart it. And so I was like, my first job was as an SRE doing like monitoring of Reddit, in fact. But yeah, no, it was definitely a like, hey, early 20s and mid 20s are a magical time where you can not sleep, eat nothing but garbage, don't exercise, and you still survive and you're fine the next day. So it was like, that was definitely the peak of that.
After Reddit got acquired, Steve went on to work at Hipmunk. You followed him. At one point, you guys are back at Reddit. Seems like you're great at figuring out who to work with. What do you see in people that you're working with, and who's on your personal board of advisors when it comes to career decisions?
So I think from the first one, Hipmunk was actually the first real opportunity we had to grow a company past its initial startup phase. So, if you look at Reddit for the first 5 years, we never had more than 10 employees. And so we never really did that much in the way of hiring. We got acquired very early, and the team was always very small. 18 months. It was the company was founded in June of 05, and we got acquired in October of 06. And so it was a really 15 months, very short startup period. And from that point on, we were just a small autonomous unit inside of Condé Nast. And so we hired a very small number of people in the meantime. And it wasn't really until we started. So Hipmunk was also co-founded by Steve Hoffman. And at that point, he was the CTO there, and siren songed me over to come and join, which was actually it was a good choice. I felt a little. It was a tough decision to make, and in fact, this is one of those cases where honestly the number one person I talked to about this is my wife. At that point, it's like it's like, is it time to do another startup? Like, should I abandon this like lovely, stressful but full-time job and like go back to being a startup? This is also around the time where we were planning on having a family, and so the idea of like leaving my job with a child in my future, kind of decided actually that this is like probably the last chance I'd have, and so decided to do it. And I would say that a lot of the work at Hipmunk was discovering really how to grow a company up. Learning how to hire, learning how to fire, learning the importance of management was really that period of time, to be honest. And in fact, I say one of the people who's definitely on my long-term advisor / friend / mentor is our VP of engineer at Hipmunk. This guy Seth Sakamoto. We've been now friends for, it's been 10 years now. And, he was my boss at one point at Hipmunk. He's not my friend and mentor, and like we bang ideas off each other all the time.
Yeah, that's really cool. So at Hipmunk, you learn how to grow a team. You gain all the basically CTO experiences / training there. And
I had my first management experience at Hipmunk. We learned how to, one of the jokes I had was like, we learned what PMs do, was the first, because we never had a PM at Reddit at that point. I learned what designers are for. It's like, oh, great. Somebody can actually take care of this whole making it look nice. That's great. That's much better than what engineers would come up with. And then all the mechanics in between. I remember I remember the first time. So at the time I was like, I was the backend manager, like infrastructure and kind of data and platform. And I was sitting in a meeting with our head of design, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, oh boy, if we're both in the same room, this is going to be a doozy of a meeting. And now it's like I spend all my time in like giant cross-functional meetings where like, I spend all this time talking to our GC about whatever the hell's going on with privacy on Reddit, which is historically would have been something like a younger version of me would have been terrified at the idea of like, I'm going to spend up my time with like cross-functional like discussions. Like that's how can I talk to these people? They're normal humans as opposed to engineers. But like, no, it's been fun. And I think like, it's like anything else too. I think that the process to get from that version of me to this version of me is like a slow, gradual transition, right? Like every step along the way, there's another barrier, and you can either go over it or through it or avoid it, or decide not, it's time to stop. And I guess I apparently lack an ability to stop. So I have, the running joke I have right now is, hey, a CTO at a huge company like Reddit, nowhere to go but down. So
I mean, like, first of all, I don't think you will ever go down. But at one point, you joined a company as a co-founder, and then you joined as a first employee. You joined another fast-growing startup. You also mentioned Reddit was growing really steadily, right? Why do you think Reddit grew steadily compared to the other company that you've worked for?
Yeah, I think to frame it in, this is something that wasn't obvious at the time, but in retrospect is very obvious. Mm-hmm. So what we didn't realize with Reddit originally was that Reddit had immediate product market fit. Mm-hmm. And that phrase didn't even exist until 5 years after Reddit was founded. Reddit always filled a solution it filled a need that people had. It took us another 10 years to articulate what that need is. And the way we describe it now is that Reddit is a community platform, and we help people find community and belonging. Mm-hmm. And our mission is to bring community and belonging to everyone in the world, right? So, and that in retrospect seems obvious, but at the time was like, we're just trying to get people entertaining stuff and give them a chance to communicate. The fact of the matter is that every user, the acquisition of Reddit users was always difficult, and onboarding of Reddit users still continues to be difficult. But once we get people, they stick, and that means there's something magical in the product that makes them want to stick. I think to contrast that with working on Hipmunk. Hipmunk was the anti-Reddit in a lot of ways, in that it was a travel startup that had a built-in monetization scheme up front, and every user we got on Hipmunk we fought for, and every user we retained. Like retaining users on a travel startup, if you see the same person twice in a year, you've succeeded. Whereas like on Reddit, we talk about daily active users and about retention rates that are kind of day over day, and so. The nice thing about the contrast between the two was one, after 5 years working at Reddit with a bunch of users who constantly telling you what they want, having and also having trouble with the business model, having a company with a built-in business model was very nice, except for the fact we had to fight for every user. We got a chance to like really learn about like the value of experimentation. You don't want to mess up with your funnel if the last step in the funnel is like somebody entering their credit card number. Like it's the one place you want to make sure that they are absolutely not, there's nothing broken at that point, because if you lose that user, you lose life. Making sure that we had like good notions of, what should the user experience be? What's our goals? Like what's our vision? What's our mission? Like all the stuff that just kind of became part of running a company. We really kind of discovered as we were doing Hipmunk. And then, bringing that back to Reddit was actually the fun part. Like, I think the lovely thing about coming back to Reddit in 2016 was there was a giant pile of problems that Reddit was experiencing at that point, but they were very similar to the problems we'd experienced like 5 years before. And we already had a playbook to use to deal with them. And we had a whole bunch of experience with doing the other things that are needed to build a company. And it felt like it still to this day feels like a magical second chance at an opportunity to like solve a bunch of problems that I had cared a lot about that I had already had some answers for.
Yeah. So you're saying when Reddit just started, people are using it every day. You guys had product market fit right away. But for the travel websites, it was the opposite. What do you think were the different main problems you guys are facing at those companies?
Well, I mean, one of the we've had a whole bunch of like fake taglines for Reddit. The one that I always liked was "Come for the cat, stay for the community." It's all about. Initially, the attraction of Reddit was always the entertainment or the information, and in a way that is like, how should I put it? Like the community at Reddit has always had this kind of innate sort of snarky skepticism that's stuck around for the entire duration of the site, and it's kind of a cultural thing. And it means that like Reddit's the one place on the internet where the comments are actually better than the content in a lot of ways. When traditionally it's like, why would you read comments on the internet? Well, like the one place you can read them is actually on Reddit for the most part. Now, that said, we put a lot of effort and time into making sure that experience is smooth, right? Because if you think about it, you have the ultimate case of we've always been outnumbered by our user base by about 1,000,000 to 1, and so whatever things we do has to scale up faster than our team can. And so we've always tried to optimize for community self-governance and like making sure that where we have the places that we can actually keep track of it. So like, okay, so one example, voting on Reddit has been a core competency since the very beginning. And it's actually a really important point to be able to make sure that the votes that we count are the ones that are the good ones. And good is a subjective term. And what I mean by good here is, we don't want to make it a place for cheating and like boosting content that shouldn't be in front of a bunch of users. And that starts off with being about spam, and it later becomes about like the whole bevy of misbehaving that people can do on the internet. And so the line I've always used in this one is like, we count every vote, but that doesn't mean every vote counts. And it's a game of making sure that we can identify when people are cheating or doing things that are ill-begotten. I think to contrast, and that goes along with just scaling. So traffic's always high. We always have to scale up to deal with our users, and that means scaling the product. It means scaling the experience. It means scaling the technology, and all of those have different pitfalls and learnings along the way. I'd say the contrast with Hipmunk was just the funnel is just so sacred. Like you have to make sure that like every step you add to the funnel, you're going to lose users. And like if you're talking about optimizing for getting single digits of bookings in a unit of time, that better be as tight as possible. And you have to be able to identify all the places where you're losing people and why. And so we got very good at like, we actually built out a very rich data science pipeline from scratch at Hipmunk. And we had an awesome experimentation framework. And if anything, I've been spending a lot of time coming back to Reddit, just chasing that framework we had set up. And so, the learning there is kind of craftsmanship. It sounds kind of hokey, but like, you gotta have an experience that is actually pleasant and well thought out and like also very well measured and maintained. And that's been something that's been a little harder to apply to Reddit oftentimes because there's just so much happening on Reddit at any given time.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really interesting point. Like you said, Reddit's community is self-governance. There are many new apps trying to replicate the community building aspect of Reddit. On Reddit, everything seems really organic. How do you guys do it?
Self-governance was the cornerstone of how we ended up bootstrapping the site to its current size. So the origin story of that is, what's unique about Reddit as a platform is that we started off with originally it was just a single page that was the front page of Reddit, where all the content kind of accumulated, and then realized early on that as the community gets, as the community of Reddit users gets broader, the topical areas that they want to engage with will kind of fan out. And then you don't want to end up in a situation where you have like the average be the response that you see, because that's how you get like the lowest common denominator set of things. Separately, there was a certain amount of pressure to start to identify places to categorize content, because like politics is always something that's divisive. And even back in 2006, 2007 was like the first thing. It's like, why is there all this politics on my front page? Was like a constant complaint. And so what we did early on was we decided, like, okay, so let's just try to scale this up in the obvious way of, we'll make topical areas, call them subreddits, and just hand build a couple of them. And this was Steve's strategy, and it was brilliant in that he just we had a plan early on to, like, at some point we'll figure out a way to make these self-serve, but let's just start off with the basics of just like build a couple of our own. And that turned into a problem of also figuring out how to moderate communities, where you start to need people who want to actually engage with the community and keep track of, like, manage spam, manage the community health. And so when we actually we had a chance to kind of experiment with it early on with about 10 communities. Before we called them communities, they were just subreddits. When we opened up to sort of the self-serve model and kind of opened it up, there was already some well-trodden kind of paths on, hey, look, we'll let you run your community. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And for probably about for the first roughly 10 years of subreddits, the model was, yeah, create any community you want and good luck. See you later. And so it just kind of went off into this like organic growth model of, success or failure, here you go. And it wasn't until really recently, like last couple of years, where we started to look at successes and failures to try to help communities to grow, or at least try, having a giant pile of like anecdotes and insights into what helps communities grow, being able to actually help with that process. But I will say that at the end of the day, the moderation approach is one where, hey, look, we want people to be engaged with the content that they are. We want them to engage the content they're interested in, either from the standpoint of being able to submit to communities that are share common interests, or being able to moderate communities that share that kind of common interest. And the only thing that scales with humans is humans. So we can either do it in the heavy-handed way where we have to be the arbiters of taste, or we can let communities figure it out on their own. And I think, self-governance is a pretty well demonstrated way to operate. And so we chose that one.
Yeah. A question on the competitor side. You guys had a company called Dig. You guys were the underdog back then. Now you guys are obviously the winner. What's the difference between Reddit and Dig? And how do you guys win in the end?
So yeah, this is around 2010 when Dig was our competitor, or before. We were always the underdog, but I think by about 2010, we discovered we'd actually kind of caught up. In fact, what went wrong with Dig, and actually Dig was a very important lesson to me early on, which was, if you're going to do something drastic, make sure to only do one thing drastic at a time. Dig had a very well publicized disaster in middle of 10, where they were doing simultaneously a technology rebuild, a business model tweak, and they also updated the way they did their algorithms at the same time. And they did it all with like a hard cutover. And so it's like it's a good case study in how to break trust with your community at the same time that your technology is brittle and not working because it's brand new. And just kind of do everything wrong at once. And I apologize to any former Dig users and Dig employees who are listening to this. I mean, we at that point, so at the time, it's like August of 10, we actually dropped by Dig headquarters, and we was like the entire engineering team of 4 dropped by Dig to kind of say hi, in part just to kind of see how things were going. They were using specific technologies we were already using. And we just wanted to make sure there was anything we could do to help, because we were kind of afraid about the onslaught of users that would arrive on our front door if Dig were to go down. And so I remember that week was like a tough one. We had to scale up drastically and like kind of absorb the onslaught. Like I said, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of technology lessons learned, a lot of business model lessons learned. Since then, it's been actually fun to watch the entire social space kind of grow up, and to show that, the model of Reddit still works, and it's actually really effective. So, I don't really know who our competitor is at this point. Kind of choose your adventure, but we're probably competing with everyone else for time at this point. It's pretty broad base.
Yeah, I think Reddit has such a powerful community. I couldn't think of a direct competitor nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's kind of like we're kind of like the progression of like forums. Like, what do forums turn into in the modern web and modern apps, and like. The model works, the technology still works. And as long as you have good moderation, I think another thing I should mention too about, differences of us is that, honestly, the culture of the platform is important. So there was an initial kind of culture that was baked in of like how to self-govern. And we kind of built in a set of rules, like a way for moderators to set their own rules and like enforce them. And that also helps to set up cultures. And so it's less so that we're like a giant moderated platform. It's more so that we're a bunch of communities that all have their own models of how to govern. And they can set us their own tone, and it just kind of works. I mean, the nice thing about that model is that, there are rules that are enforced on the platform by most communities that we can never enforce as a business. Like, most communities have a rule that effectively boils down to don't be a jerk, right? And, it's not much more than I can call it if I see it, but there's a certain power in that, and you can have the community decide what jerk is depending on the tone of the community.
Yeah, I feel like Reddit has always been keeping it real. Most other platforms are all hacked by advertisers. I feel like Reddit has a lot of organic content. Most people on there seems pretty honest.
Oh, for sure. And I think that, I used to joke that if there wasn't like 1,000 people telling me I was doing a terrible job on the platform, then I wasn't doing enough. The community is definitely, it's exciting to always hear exactly what we're doing wrong at all times.
How do you guys keep the community so strong, even to today?
I think that, so where we put a lot of our work, and where we've put, especially for the last 4 or 5 years, is to figure out, so we've kind of bucketed under what we call authentic behavior. And this is a way to kind of absorb things like, so it's starting like working up the hierarchy of needs for community. The first one you encounter is spam. So if you have a platform that's job is to generate attention and eyeballs, it's going to be gamed. And so it is impossible to do a perfect job on spam, but everyone who thinks that there's a lot of spam on Reddit should consider that we catch like 99.9% of it that's actually going out. And of course, that last little 0.1% is annoying, but it's like the tip of the iceberg. And that with that spam comes all of the like pile of, I won't even call them humans or bots or agents. They're just these things that are trying to game the system and work on it. So it's very adversarial. So that's kind of like one major piece. Going up from there is just providing a safe environment for users. And, again, we will never do a perfect job, but we will always try to iterate and improve on what we did in the past. And that goes all the way from like, starting off with starting to get onto preventing user harassment where possible. Trying to identify places where, groups are being targeted on the platform. Whenever you have communities that self-identify, especially in at-risk groups, you end up with wars between communities and being able to maintain, who's attacking whom at any given time. Last summer we rolled out our first ever hate speech policy, which was something that we had to learn to scale up and basically again improve the level of discourse. And so we just keep trying to keep the bar for discourse high. And we try to pay attention to user safety as a main component of how we operate. And we try to facilitate our users being able to see what they want, control what information they share, and honestly have a fun but real experience. And it's a very tough line to be able to stay on top of.
Yeah,
edgy but safe is difficult. And we'll never hit it, but we'll always try.
I think this is called innovation stack because the co-founder of Square was on the show and then he wrote a book called Innovation Stack. So essentially a lot of things you guys were doing right to make it unbeatable, I guess like uncopyable.
Yeah, I think what's been hard to replicate from Reddit is really the culture, like the culture of the stack, the culture of the platform, and also just the cultures that are formed in the communities. It's somewhat it. There's been some fantastic studies of like how rules on Reddit have turned into cultural norms, and it is very like it's somewhat intangible. And beware of physicists who are meddling in metaphysics. But so I definitely feel about Reddit is like there's a whole bunch of like it's like watching experimental sociology like writ large and mostly functional.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. It's hard for any other platform to do anything remotely close. At one point, Condé Nast bought Reddit. The core team went on to do your own startups or other projects. A few years later, you all came back. What have you guys learned during the time when you guys were working on other projects? What have you brought back to Reddit?
Well, yeah, I think with the leaving originally, it was, we were acquired. We had a pretty clear kind of like somewhat standard like 3-year vesting cycle, and like we never thought of it. At that point in our lives, it didn't seem like Reddit was a vocation. It felt like it was like a first thing, which is why especially Steve went off and decided to like, well, make another startup and just do it again. And I had the same kind of attraction to like go over to Hipmunk and do the same thing. And it was tough to leave, but it definitely felt like, hey, Reddit was in good shape. We'll kind of let it be and like go off and do other things. Fast forward 5 years, and like middle of 15, early 16 was like a tough time for Reddit, where it kind of scaled past this point where it was stable and there was a bunch of problems on the platform and a bunch of toxicity kind of like worked its way in. And that year was the year where I discovered that I thought I had kind of emotionally separated myself from Reddit and thought of it as like a kind of a done thing. I'd even like a couple of years after that, after leaving, like kind of gave away all my t-shirts. Like I had like 1 or 2 like of the original t-shirts. Stupid. I wish I had all my vintage t-shirts. And that was the point where I discovered that I actually wasn't as separated from it as I thought. Or like, it's almost like it's like finding your adult child is like going through a rough time. Maybe was the best analogy. And like, decided to go back and just, there is a certain like reason why the return of the founders stories happen and turn into some successes. It's like you kind of get, well, first of all, you kind of know the problem space. You're coming into a new job with a bunch of experience, and separately, you do get a certain amount of like free pass because, the way I always thought about it coming back was that I've seen Reddit go through some terrible things in the past. I personally have broken Reddit in terrible ways, and it's always come back. And so it's not like there's less of a fear about like, taking this thing apart and putting it back together and hoping it still turns on when you've already done it a couple times. And that was like something that took a fair amount of, had to kind of do it to see that it was actually possible to kind of like come in, make some changes, and things didn't break, or they broke, but we fixed those too. And kind of work from there to grow the company up into an actual like lovely business as it is today. Here I am at 2016, we had 75 employees, and now we're getting close to 1,000. And it's a lovely place to be.
In terms of personal growth, when you already had the track record on building Reddit, you probably have a lot of other options to work on other exciting projects or companies. Why did you decide to stick around?
I think that it would be hard to pry me away from Reddit at this point, just because the whole job has been about growth, right? There's always like another challenge, and like the problems today are always different from the problems yesterday. And so, I have a ton of challenges, and I get a chance to like learn new things every day, which is fantastic. I don't think if you'd asked me 10 years ago if this is where I would be, I would have been way off I think at that point, right? It's like, or even like 15 years ago, I would have thought I was going to be an academic. 10 years ago, I would have thought I was going to still be an IC, hacking away. And here I am as like, running an org of like a couple hundred people and not writing a lick of code day to day. It was a very gradual shift over a very long time, but it's been delightful, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. Plus I have to say, like the people are fantastic. Like that's been the real joy has been hey, I spent the last 5 years growing a really awesome team. I kind of want to be with them when they continue to succeed. Watch them grow.
You guys are growing really fast. You're hiring a lot of people. What do you look for in the people that you hire? As a non-technical person, if I want to work with technical, talented people, how do I recognize their talent? What are some benchmarks that people should look for? What does technical people look for in non-technical co-founder or like people to work with?
Yeah, so I think I could probably answer the first one. I'll cover some of the second. So if kind of what we look for, it's honestly been a game of just continuously trying to raise our bar for the talent we hire. And the nice thing about any kind of exercise of bar raising is like as you hire better people, they naturally attract better people, and also your company gets better. It's kind of magical. Now the hard part is always getting started there, and there really is some importance in like getting some good people in your initial founding team. I think that the hard part about growing up a business is honestly the other side of it, which is that if you're constantly raising your bar, it means that you're going to start to grow past some of the people you hired early on. And that's either an opportunity or a crisis, depending on how things are arranged, right? Because the opportunity is, like to my point about, I feel like I'm growing every day, I've got to keep growing because the whole business is moving around me. And so I can't stay still. And it turns into honestly some tough decisions and discussions about like, hey, is this like kind of the right place anymore for certain people? And that's actually okay because at the end of the day, it is work. It's a job, right? It's not like it's not personal. And in fact, I often try to go into, especially for management discussions, I try to go into with a certain like, hey, my job as a manager is to help you grow in your career, and ultimately, if that's here, great. If it's not here, also great. I'll totally help you in whatever next thing you try to do. And that's just has to be part of the contract up front. In terms of like what to look for, I would say this is again something that's definitely changed over time for me. If you'd asked me like early on, like technical chops is really critical, being able to be really good at what you do. That's still very important. And like, I don't want to downplay the fact that like, yes, engineers' primary job is to generally write code and be good at it and to like be technical. It's also really great if you're not a jerk and you're able to actually like work with other people and like work on a team. And, the cultural fit and knowing that, well, first of all, defining what you want in your culture is critical as you grow. Sometimes you have to define it by discovering things that don't work. Other times you discover it as you're kind of like finding things that do. It takes a long time to have cultural changes shift. Cultural shifts take a while. Turn that into a sentence. And so you have to be very deliberate and can't change it too often, but you get a chance to set the tone of how your people work. It also helps you define like what you're looking for in candidates when you know what your culture is. So I think for Reddit, we want people who are going to work hard. We also want people who are going to work well with others and like can collaborate. Ultimately Reddit is a community platform. And so you have to have a notion of like working with people. I think also, it started off as a don't be a jerk, and then we've defined it more in the positives over time. I think, back to some of my roots, like for engineers, I like critical thinkers. Like I don't necessarily care about getting the right answer. I care about showing me a path where you can find an answer is more important. Because honestly, like for a lot of technical interviews, like I don't want a gimmick. I don't want a riddle. Like you have to I actually like giving people real world problems and seeing what they do with it, because I don't probably have an answer. In fact, most of your day job, you're not going to solve a problem that has an easy answer. Like if it has an easy answer, you can Google it. That's what the internet's for. I think in terms of like the answer to the second question about what to look for, in a technical, like being a non-technical person who is looking for something technical, start off with, hey, if they seem really smart, but you can't understand what they're doing or what they're trying to achieve, it's probably not going to work. Like they can be super awesome and a great startup person, but they have to be able to talk to you, especially as a co-founder. To some extent you can take some of it on trust later when they're working on things that are abstruse and they know what they're doing. But as an initial relationship, you have to have some sort of common value and common framework to talk.
Yeah, because sometimes as a non-technical founder, we got introduced by friends to someone who is technical. How do we evaluate the person's technical skills besides reading through their resume? Also, what's the differences between a great engineer who will succeed at Google versus someone who will succeed as a technical co-founder?
I think that honestly, for the sake of like starting a company, definitely dedication is a part of it in a way. It's like you're doing it for the glory and with a certain amount of hope. So maybe to flip that around, it doesn't hurt to be a little crazy as part of it. Like, you have to be a little bit off the beaten path because you're going to have to be willing to kind of like, whenever I am, well, let me put it this way. As I've been growing up the company and like debating with people who are thinking about taking the cushy software job at the larger company, my usual argument with them, or like my statement that usually makes them decide is like, look, that job is going to be there in a year. In fact, the offer probably won't expire because, they're hiring 1,000 of that job. This job exists right now. And so, it's no harm, no foul if you want to take the dedicated clear path job, but maybe live a little while you can. I think that usually resonates with people, or at least gives them a chance to make the choice of like, do I want the paycheck or do I want something that's a little bit more? But I do think that is actually a large chunk of it. Like we usually talk about internally about hiring missionaries over mercenaries. It gets a lot harder to do that as the company grows because, to some extent we start becoming a more stable business. It becomes a lot easier to just be like paycheck to paycheck. But I still want people with a certain amount of passion and dedication. So for the helping, find a co-founder, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, I think founding a company is not much different from being a parent. Like you don't really know what you're going to do in those situations until you're in it. And, unlike being a parent, the operation is generally reversible. So if you decide you don't want to do it anymore, you can get a bailout, find somebody to take over for you. It's considered a bad form as a parent. As a co-founder, it's often you see this come up with technical co-founders or on both sides where, at some point the business scales to the point where they decide that, hey, maybe me being the boss here, or being the manager here is a bad idea. And that's a perfectly reasonable solution, is to say like, yeah, I don't want to be the manager of 100 people. Let's hire somebody who's better at it than me.
I love the honesty. It's a really great way to look at things. If you can do it, then do it. And then if you can always do the other thing. In terms
I have to
of
say, in fact, I think that the tricky part for me, honestly, of growing Reddit to this size is that I think as I've probably gotten across in this interview, I don't take myself hugely seriously. I actually give people a hard time to take themselves too seriously, and I have to remind myself like, oh, I guess I am kind of a big deal. Like there's a lot. I
definitely think you're a big deal. So,
like, for leadership styles, like, I prefer to kind of lead from the. I usually joke I'm kind of lead from the back. Like I would rather encourage people to be their best and like inspire and kind of like leader mentality, as opposed to just kind of be a slave driver, for want of a better word. Or even like somebody who's a little bit heavy-handed. Now, again, like the luxury I'm in is that finding people who are awesome at their job and who are also very motivated. It's lovely to watch them be experts and be fantastic at their work. So, yeah, I mean, but also culture is important. It's another place where it's like, hey, different companies run different ways. There are totally companies that have the same kind of like strict hierarchy versus more ad hoc setup. Again, I think for Reddit, like I prefer the more distributed, like where possible, distributed decision making is better. Just because like, why the hell did you hire all these experts if you're not going to get their opinion on something?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the open-mindedness. As a CTO of Reddit, I feel like the technology is changing really fast. There's always something new coming up. How do you keep yourself stay on top of the technology game, or how do you expand your own personal knowledge database?
Well, I will mention that I do read a lot of Reddit, but I also tend to read. I think at this point, let's see. I still also read a heck of a lot of Hacker News. I think I still use Hacker News this day as like a good place to kind of keep tapped on what's going on in tech at large. Generally, I think to be honest, one of the hard parts about COVID has been, and it took me a while to notice this, was that I actually spent a lot of time on my commute reading. So I used to commute by public transit, and so I spent a lot of time in the morning reading. and it's been a lot harder to kind of keep that up. But I will say that good old-fashioned books at this point has been a major source of it, especially as I get more into management, like figuring out books that have, there's management books are a dime a dozen, but finding good ones is an art, and like definitely been a couple of them that have resonated well with me. I think the one that comes to mind is like what is it? The Hard Thing About Hard Things was one that I read about 2 years ago when going through some tough reorg stuff, and it was a great reminder of like no matter how bad a day I was having, there's much worse days you could be having. So yeah, no, honestly, it's finding time to read and just to do the stuff that feels like you're not working but actually are.
Yeah.
Self-work, self-help is actually critical. Practice self-care.
That's so interesting. I thought you were going to read the TechCrunch every day or like some sort of technology journal.
No, it's more like it's just kind of like just kind of keep up to date. Just read low key. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like you're pretty successful today. Reddit's like a really big tech company now. What's the difference between you and someone who also joined a top startup who may not achieve your level of success? What's the difference between someone like yourself to them? And I know it sounds like a super douchey, but like I feel like I definitely try to understand what make a great person great.
No, so I'll be totally honest on this one. I'm not trying to continue down this like low key thing. It's like I really don't think people appreciate how important luck is in the situation. Like, I've worked extremely hard. I have done a lot in my career so far. I've also been super lucky. Like being in the right place at the right time doesn't hurt. Like, hey, at the end of the day, like I got into startups because I happened to run into an old friend after a talk who just pitched me on a startup idea. I became the first employee at Reddit because I happened to have a failed startup in YC and had 2 free rooms in my apartment. Those little things are important, and like they don't feel like much at the time, but they end up being the points that change your life. Like it's like, I put it in the same class of things as like, meeting your spouse, right? Like that. Maybe the skies opened and angels sang, but sometimes it's just like at the time didn't seem like anything other than like, oh cool, new relationship, and you find out that you have something magical with somebody. That was another thing I did in 2006, by the way, was met my wife that year. I must have been indestructible. I didn't sleep much.
Oh, nice. Congrats.
Anyway, no, it's funny. I think that but the flip side of this, so the things that are under control are, like work on things you like as well. I think that passion is important, and passion usually correlates to something you actually like to work on. And so if you hate it, it's gonna be a lot hard. It's not impossible to work on something you hate and have it be successful and like be a major thing, but it's definitely not the standard way of things.
Yeah. What do you wish people knew about your job?
Well, okay, so one of my running jokes has been that the T in CTO stands for therapy. I spend a lot of time talking to people. I think that there's it's like anything else. Like there's a lot of day-to-day and a lot of coordination that happens that ends up being like just a bunch of like a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of discussions, a lot of stuff that feels like it's not might be a little bit to the side of the direction of where you'd expect it to be. But it's all about relationships to some extent, like, keeping track of your team, keeping track of your people, making sure that things are on track. That's probably most of it. It's like it is less architecture and more team building, but it's critical for the business.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine the back-to-back meetings every single day. And we're at the last part of the interview. There's a little fire round for you. The first question is, what's your favorite book?
Oh boy. So let me think about that one. I gave one that actually has been pretty high on the list, which is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. That one was actually very important. Another one, just a random book that really resonated with me. Actually, Shogun. It's a story of a 16th century Dutch, I think, merchant who's stranded in Imperial Japan. And the lesson I learned from that book that really hit me was, the main character is this character by the name of Toranaga, and the his entire strategy of how to succeed is to delay until the decision is inevitable. So it's like, and that it's not to say that delay all the things, but like not everything is always urgent is the learning out from that one.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, 2 episodes ago, the CEO of Skillshare said the same thing. His dad told him to like, don't respond to the email right away. So, I mean, I like the message was kind of resonating for these episodes. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say Steve Huffman. I think that, the two of us have been working together now for 16 years. And, it's great to have found somebody that, implicit trust, and we have honest conversations, and it's been really great to be able to build this a set of wonderful companies with them.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's 3 companies like Reddit 1,
Reddit 1,
and Reddit now. So,
yeah, exactly.
So who would you invite to your dinner party?
I would really like to at some point. I this is a lazy answer, but I have to say it. It's like Elon Musk. I must be a fun guy to have at your dinner party. So I think he's also I think he also wins he just wins the nerd trifecta at all times, right? He's got like he builds cool cars. He has his own fleet of rockets. And he makes flamethrowers. I mean, like, it's like,
what else do you need?
What else do you need? It's like, he has a company called The Boring Company that makes holes in the ground. It's like, how? Just, yeah, no, I think it'd be pretty high. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are you guys going to talk about in the dinner party?
I think we would probably end up having a discussion about cryptocurrency, which seems to be pretty hot on the list right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I would probably, Dogecoin, definitely. I would probably just end up, once I got over the initial fangirl screaming that I would do, I would probably end up trying to figure out how I could get on one of those, eventually retire on Mars, I think is going to be the long-term plan.
Wow.
Or maybe asteroid mining. That's always been like if I was going to get into a random, I feel like asteroid mining would be the future direction of like some sort of space endeavor.
Yeah, well, I love those. So where can we find you outside of work?
Well, COVID time is weird, so probably at my house is the same answer for both of them. But it's fine. I am the father of 2. I've got 2 small kids, 10 and 7, and so generally helping around their school, doing stuff with them for sure. That's a big one.
What is your favorite thing to read on Reddit? Favorite topics?
Oh boy. Okay. So I think, I would say favorite community variously has been, I've always been a fan of Change My View. Or I think more recently political discussion. Like there's 2 communities that are about like kind of having like open-minded discussions on the internet is just it's almost like it's not a lost art. It was never an art. And so to see that it can actually happen on Reddit is fantastic. So generally, like having kids, there's a couple of good kid themed communities that are on the like humorous side. There's one called Hold My Juice Box, which is generally kids getting into weird situations and not actually hurting themselves, but definitely something embarrassing. It's really pretty funny.
I'm gonna check them out. That's so cool. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
All right, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Beside LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.